The iPhone 14 Pro is the best phone under $1,000. It's powerful, has amazing cameras, sports a beautiful display, and the notch is dead. It's hard to think of anything truly wrong with this device, and it's perfect for people tired of giant handsets. Apple has really nailed its smartphone formula. The iPhone 14 Pro represents a duality, both as something extremely similar to its predecessor while also being simultaneously new. It features a lot of camera upgrades and the dynamic island, which replaces the infamous notch 5 years after the notch's debut on the iPhone X. I can confidently say that the iPhone 14 Pro, pending a few more test results, is the best phone I have ever used, and the only argument is whether the extra screen space offered by the iPhone 14 Pro Max justifies the $100 premium over the standard iPhone 14 Pro. From its pocketable form factor to its sheer horsepower and camera capabilities, the iPhone 14 Pro stomps on everything else I have used since the dawn of the modern smartphone. I can't believe how good it is. I loved using it the whole time I worked on my iPhone 14 Pro review. Sure, the iPhone 14 Pro isn't the huge upgrade you might have expected, but that's because the iPhone 13 Pro did a lot right. The Pro series has hit a point where it's so good that there's not a lot of upward mobility. When we got this year is the epitome of iteration: better cameras, better and brighter display, a new design element, and more powerful hardware. The iPhone 14 Pro starts at $999 for the 128GB model, just like last year. Rumor about a price hike proved false, and you won't catch me up complaining about it. The 256GB variant costs $1,099, 512GB goes for $1,299, and 1TB will run you $1,500. And with all of the video features, you might want the extra storage. The 1080p limit on ProRes video for the 128GB versions remain. I think the Galaxy S22 Plus stands as the best price comparison for the iPhone 14 Pro. Both start at $999, feature top-end screens, powerful cameras, and excellent processors. But other top Android phones cost less than the iPhone 14 Pro, such as the $899 Pixel 6 Pro and the $749 OnePlus 10 Pro. Apple has a spread of iPhones for you, starting at $799 for the iPhone 14, with the iPhone 14 Plus climbing to $899 and the iPhone 14 Pro Max sitting at $1,099. I find the iPhone 14 Pro's design dichotomous. On the other hand, it looks a lot like the iPhone 13 Pro, just with an even larger camera module from the back. It might be hard to distinguish this handset from its predecessor unless you look really hard at those lenses. Admittedly, they are noticeably larger thanks to the upgrades underneath. On the other hand, the front of Apple's new phone looks a lot different. The notch is gone, replaced by the pill-shaped dynamic island. The old, tired iPhone design has finally gotten a refresh, though the cutout is still larger than those on the best Android phones because it houses Face ID. The dynamic island is actually pretty interesting. It's not just a static pill, and dynamic island expands depending on what you are doing, displaying animations for many system actions like unlocking, playing music, timers, and so on. It will even turn into a media player if you tap and hold the dynamic island while listening to music. In that way, you can access media controls without pulling down the notification center. Screen cutouts are here to stay for a while, at least until the Apples figure out under-screen Face ID and under-display cameras get away better. But as someone who never truly got used to the notch and has hated it since its inception, I like the dynamic island. Not only does it look better than the notch, it offers actual utility where its predecessor just sat there doing nothing. The iPhone 14 Pro sports a stainless steel frame with a matte finish on the back glass. Apple's ceramic shield coats the screen, providing extra durability. The phone clocks in at 7.3 ounces, a noticeable heft for such a diminutive device. And like the iPhone 13 Pro, the iPhone 14 Pro's massive camera bump ensures that it does not lay level on a flat surface. This means the phone wobbles if you try to use it while it's sitting on the table or counter. An iPhone 14 case may help with this. I like the iPhone 14 Pro's new front design despite my lack of enthusiasm for the same while black. Apple takes a while to change things up, but this is the third generation of the squared off look, which is less ergonomic than a curved back. I hope that iPhone 15 goes back to that design but for now, the iPhone 14 Pro is more of the same in most respects. I just love the depth of the notch. Samsung and Apple typically have the best smartphone displays on their respective handsets. The iPhone 14 Pro continues that trend. In fact, this is the best display I have ever seen on a phone. From the punchy colors to the insane brightness both indoors and outdoors, I have never enjoyed looking at a screen more than I do with the iPhone 14 Pro. The iPhone 14 Pro's display improved slightly over the iPhone 13 Pro's, notably in color reproduction and accuracy. However, did not hit the 2000 nit peak outdoor brightness in our measurements even with a powerful testing equipment. Returning this year is the 120Hz ProMotion display, able to clock down to 1 Hz to save on battery power. That is also key to the new always-on display. I watched Blade Runner 2049 all the way through on this display, thrilled with incredible neons, dingy city scenes, and harsh oranges in the later part of the film. The iPhone 14 Pro offered me the best viewing experience of this movie I have had, besting even my gaming monitor and TV. That's impressive. Games look equally impressive. Genshin Impact with its saturated palette and enemy styling looked amazing, especially at the higher and smoother frame rates. Other titles like Pascal, Swagger, Dead Cells, and Asphalt 9 all also looked great. Thanks to the display and new chipset, gaming is an absolute treat on the iPhone 14 Pro. I have no trouble imagining that Samsung will match the iPhone 14 Pro's display quality when the Galaxy S23 series arrives in early 2024, but other Android phone makers have a huge hurdle to overcome to match this panel. Apple hasn't changed up the camera array's design, but virtually everything about the iPhone 14 Pro's 3 cameras is new. The 3 lenses are 48 megapixel wide, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and 12 megapixel telephoto lens. These are new lenses and larger sensors, and the most interesting camera is undoubtedly the 48 megapixel sensor. This is Apple's first pixel binding sensor, and that means it captures 12 megapixel images with 4 pixels combined into one effective larger pixel, which results in better low light performance and color fidelity. I'm glad Apple has implemented this, though it's certainly not groundbreaking. Samsung's been doing pixel binding for a while now, and the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra features a 108 megapixel camera with the 9 pixel binding potential. The 48 megapixel sensors adds the ability to shoot full resolution RAW images, although you have to enable this option in the camera settings. You won't see RAW as an option in the camera app by default. RAW images are uncompressed photos that gives you greater latitude for editing in Adobe Photoshop and mobile apps like Adobe Lightroom. We downloaded some photos to a PC and edited them in Lightroom and loved having the extra degree of control, although it will be overkill for most users. The ultra-wide camera still has a 120-degree field of view but is now backed by a bigger sensor for better low-light performance. The photos we took bear this out. We like wide-angle imagery well enough, but what really floats our boat is macro photography. When Apple added macro to the iPhone 13 Pro at first without the ability for users to control when it was activated, We were not impressed. The macro mode on the iPhone 14 Pro, which uses the ultra-wide lens, is a different story. It's clearly making use of the sharper lens and massively improved performance of the new sensor, meaning close-up images can look breathtaking. We wish Apple had gone further than the 3x optical zoom with the 12 megapixel telephoto lens. However, it's good camera, but you can get 10x optical zoom with the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra. Not to mention that phone's insanely highly interpolated 100x space zoom, and you still can't take good-looking moonshots with the iPhone. Apple does have one more zoom option, although it's actually part of the primary sensor rather than a separate lens. With a central 12 megapixel section of the new 48 megapixel snapper used for 2x zoom shots, this means you get 12 megapixel pixel bind stills and really good looking 2x zoom photos from the same lens, and it's also a great tool for portrait mode shots too. On the video front, Apple has upgraded cinematic mode to support 4K 30fps. Footage looks great, and every time you use this mode, you will feel like a real cinematographer. There's also a new video mode, Action, which you enable by selecting the tiny running man icon in the upper right section of the camera app. Because the digital stabilization technology employed in the mode works by cropping away excessive movement until you have a smooth subject in the center of your video. Action mode shooting tops out at 2.8K rather than 4K and works well, as long as you understand that you are losing visual information every time you shoot. Apple has not added 8K video, and honestly, we don't miss it at all. Across the board, this is a good imaging system, and that's surely due in part to Apple's new Photonic engine, which takes Apple's diffusion image technology and moves it to the front to the pipeline, applying it to uncompressed images, which results in better light and color performance. Apple could have done more here in the zoom and megapixel department, but the iPhone 14 Pro still represents the start of something special in the field of Apple iPhone photographic technology and remains one of the best camera phones on the market based on our time with it. The iPhone 14 Pro sports the new A16 Bionic chipset, Apple's Silicon's latest chip built on the new 4nm process. It features a 6-core CPU, 5-core GPU, and 16-core neural engine. It has many improvements over the A15 Bionic from the iPhone 13 Pro, such as a new display engine, new image signal processor, and more power efficiency. In practice, the iPhone 14 Pro is a power user's dream. It's got power for days, more than enough for most tasks. Gaming is no problem, with the iPhone 14 Pro maintaining consistently smooth frame rates in all the games I tested. The A16 Bionic also shines in video editing on the fly. Even 4K ProRes footage, you can apply effects and edits on the go with the phone barely experiencing a hiccup. The Android competition has even more ground to cover now too. The Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 has gotten closer to Apple, at least in terms of last year's Apple Silicon. I don't expect the second generation Tensor from Google to come even close to the A16 Bionic, but Google hasn't aimed for the performance crown. Tensor is leading the pack on AI smarts, so it will be interesting to see how the iPhone 14 Pro or Pixel 7 Pro stack up when it comes to machine learning focused applications. I think the A16 Bionic has more power than most people need, but there's something ever so satisfying about having more headroom than you will probably ever use. I get the same sense of satisfaction with the iPhone 14 Pro. Apple hasn't publicly stated the iPhone 14 Pro's battery capacity. Instead, we have battery life promises that are only marginally greater than the iPhone 13 Pro. Those gains likely come from efficiencies of the 4nm A16 Bionic and the new adaptive refresh rate, and not a larger battery. In our experience, 24 hours of video streaming performance appears possible, but we could also drain the battery more rapidly by using the phone outdoors in bright sunlight when the screen had to push to its maximum 2000 nits to compensate. The phone doesn't ship with a power adapter, just a USB-C to Lightning cable, but if you buy the dedicated 20-watt charger, Apple says you can get to 50% in 30 minutes, and we found the claim to be accurate. That's the same as the iPhone 13 Pro, though we still don't have ultra-fast charging with the iPhone 14 Pro. The phone also supports MagSafe and QI-based charging. An iPhone is nothing without its platform, and iOS 16, which ships with all the iPhone 14 models, is more than just window dressing. It changes some fundamental aspects of the iPhone. Not only you have the new and impressive hardware features, but the iPhone 14 Pro will work in new, unexpected, and we think pleasing ways. One of the biggest changes in the new lock screen, in addition to the ability to have multiple customizable lock screens, each one can be linked to a different focus setting. It features some really cool image segmentation technology. Other updates include a search button on the home screen, editable and retrievable text messages, email unsent, multi-stop direction in maps, live text capture from video, and image segmentation that lets you grab the subject from virtually any photo and drop it into the apps like Notes and Messages. There are tons of changes to explore and use, and they undoubtedly make the iPhone 14 Pro experience even better. I am confident in saying that based on my uses and time with the device, the iPhone 14 Pro is the best phone Apple's made. With its incredible cameras, beautiful display, and powerful performance, the iPhone 14 Pro outruns any of the competition. It's faster, smoother, and its cameras win out against everything else, even the Pixel 6 Pro. The biggest downside to the iPhone 14 Pro is the lack of a physical SIM tray in the US models, which might irritate some people. I was also less than impressed with the device in our battery life test. For $999 you can't go wrong with the iPhone 14 Pro. It's less worthwhile of an upgrade over the iPhone 13 Pro, but anything older pales in comparison. Even the iPhone 12 Pro trails the iPhone 14 Pro given the older phone's lackluster battery life. I think that the iPhone 14 Pro is truly the best phone that Apple has ever released, crushing everything else before it. It easily earns my utmost recommendation.